I find that when I go to conferences, two things. Number one is that when I speak an event like this, I hope I'm saying something profound and that's going to take away. But the truth is, you guys are so far ahead already. And hearing what Nadine just spoke about, hearing what others have spoke about this morning, I'm probably going to say a lot of the same things, but I'm going to have a little different spin. But I think what it's saying is that we're all on the right track. So I'm going to break out my conversation and my talk into three sections. I'm going to talk about my story. I'm going to talk about a broader story. And then I'm going to talk about what I think might be your story. So let me start off with my story. I spent about 10 years in executive HR and operation roles in large enterprise. So companies as large as 25,000 people. And leading HR and operations, I got to see and lead D&I and diversity and inclusive programs, et cetera. And then sometime around 2010, I pivoted and I spent 5 years in tech startups. I knew that's where the future of work was. And so I got to really get into what the technology sector was about. I worked for many scaling companies. I advised dozens, and I also started a couple of my own tech companies. And then most recently, before going on my own, I spent 2 years as the vice president of the BC Tech Association and their head of corporate innovation. And so that's when I got really entrenched into this community and seeing firsthand of the inequality that we have, particularly in tech. Tech is our future. We need more women, particularly in engineering and particularly in leadership, and that's where I really got my passion. So somewhere along the lines here, I became very passionate about women and equality. And so I was thinking last night, why was it? Was it just because of my work experience? I was thinking, actually, it's more than that. Number one, I've worked for more women CEOs than men. And I can say honestly to you, the best ones I worked for, it's just, they're all equal, I guess. But I just happen to work for amazing women CEOs. Secondly, my wife is a super strong woman who for 7 years carved out a career, but then decided when we had our child that she was going to devote 100% of her time to raising the child. And she has no regret and feels no pressure from society that some say you should also be going after a career. She is completely happy being a mother. To that child, a girl. And she's 8 years old now. And guess what? There is a 100% chance that we are going to raise her in a way that she knows she can do anything she wants. And lastly, to my story, particularly with BC Tech, learning and seeing that tech is our future. It's our economies. And so what happens if we don't diversify? If we don't get more equality for women and other underrepresented groups? And so that's my story. So my takeaway first from my story is this. I don't have all the answers. I feel like I have some credibility because of the experience that I've had and being around so many powerful women. But I'm not suggesting to you that I have the whole playbook and everything I say is absolutely the gospel. So let's get to the more broader context of, I'm going to talk about belonging, by the way. And so we've been hearing for probably a decade now this idea of the future of work is coming and there's automation, et cetera. Well, I believe the future is now. And here is my graphic to describe this. Here's what I call the beginning of work. Dudes literally bowing down. Life probably sucked, but there was this innate feeling of tribe and a sense of belonging. And as well, work and life were probably one. So you fast forward a couple 100 million years and a couple of industrial revolutions, and we had to go there. I call this a legacy of work because what made companies win then is not the frameworks, the mindsets, et cetera, not what's going to help companies win now. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases in post-secondary, we're still teaching legacy mindsets and frameworks, and that's at a detriment to all of us. I call it the low point of work because as we went through these industrial revolutions and as we started to globalize in this pursuit of shareholder value and titles and wages and all these things, we started to live to work at the expense of what? Our friends, our family, our faith. And so this is the low point of work in my point of view. So now you get to around 2008 is when you really started hearing it, particularly in Silicon Valley, the future work's coming, those pesky millennials, automation can take away all those jobs, and CEOs around the world were starting to fear what the future work was. And I'm here to say that the future work is now, and it's actually not that scary. It's intentionally a woman. Why? These gender issues have got to be dealt with now. Look at how she's dressed. Pretty casually. Long gone are the days of the skirt and the ties, etc. She got a backpack on. Why? Because in the now of work is where we're starting to bring work and life together again. And so this is happening. And one of my message around the global context of belonging is that it's not only going to be you guys having to advocate for yourselves. It's my belief that because of the connected generation, technology and sharing economy, companies will have no choice but to be more inclusive, to create culture of belonging, or they will lose because we won't allow it. As consumers, as the largest cohort ever to enter the workplace, if you're a millennial, we are going to drive the change and force organizations to become more modern. And so in our science and all of our data, here are the 10 aspects of what a now company is. If your company is not operating this way, you're already behind. And in no particular order, I'm sure they'll send the slide deck if you want this, in no particular order of importance, number 8 happens to be belonging. So a little bit of interaction here. Raise your hand if you think you have a good definition of what belonging in the workplace means. I'm not going to challenge you on it. I don't have the perfect answer either, but I'm going to give you 2 stories. Number 1, diversity. Here's how I look at it. When you think of the legacy or low point of work, diversity was, let's hire a token Asian guy. Let's hire someone with disabilities. Let's hire someone else of color. And now on our scarcity card, we see that we're diverse. And what many companies realize, not all, but many companies realize that diversity was just a vanity metric. It was for optics. So then we said inclusivity. And so for at least the last 20 years, modern companies have been saying, why don't you actually invite these underrepresented groups like women to the executive table? Why not have them in meaningful committees? Why not have them actually feel like they're part of this organization? Invite them to be more inclusive. And so now the shift to belonging is this. Even if you invite women to the boardroom and in meaningful committees or whatever, if they can't feel free to be themselves, they're not going to be at their best. And so when we go back to the beginning of work and that sense of belonging, we all want to belong to some tribe, right? Whether it's your neighborhood, your workplace, wherever. And we have to create conditions where women and underrepresented groups can just be themselves. Here's my other story, because I see a lot of young people. I was trying to think of an analogy. How many of you had a high school dance when you were in high school? Okay, so here's diversity. You've got a school, you got 3 classes. Diversity is 3 classes of grade 12 students. Diversity is everyone's invited. Woohoo! Vanity metric. Why? We all show up to this community hall for a dance, and what happens? The jocks are over in that corner, the brains are over there, we've labeled all these people, and who ends up on the dance floor? The extroverts like Nadine talked about, or those that happen to be freaking like baller dancers and stuff. They get up there and they dance. And so inclusivity says, everyone at this party comes up onto the dance floor. But then what happens then? A couple people show up. What's belonging? Belonging is you come to the dance floor and you dance the way you want to dance. Imagine a world where when we go to our nightclubs, and we go to our parties, and we go to work, that we can show up in meetings and be ourselves. That is what belonging is. And so I coach organizations how to create a culture of belonging, and I applaud them when they set out targets like 50-50 by 2025, and I get super jazzed when they started actually investing dollars into these programs. But at the end of the day, the magic starts with you guys. It's with the people. And so I'm going to leave you with what I think is the one tactic of many that all of you should employ, because I think most of you get it when you're here. But what happens when you go back to your workplace? And what I'm going to suggest to you is how you can create a culture of belonging is pretty easy, or EC. It's to be empathetic with consistency. So what does that look like? What that looks like to me, I see a lot of young people here. If you're a young woman in animation who is struggling to feel like you belong in your organization, who maybe is trying to break down barriers and just get the same opportunities as men, are you translating that feeling, that empathy in their actions towards others? So stop and think about this. How do you react to that Syrian disabled woman who the company just sponsored and hired? How do you treat that woman who just came back from her second maternity leave in 3 years? How do you treat that 55-year-old woman who lost her job in a legacy industry and is trying to rediscover herself with tools and wants to become an animation? How are you treating those people? Because belonging can only happen in an organization truly if we're consistent in our empathy for the greater good of all women. Be the strength for others. Because if we don't, we risk having a lot of women in these organizations who are super talented but will never see their potential because they don't feel like they belong. So, my message to you is this. Get on the dance floor, dance how you want to dance, but don't forget to invite everyone else to the dance floor and encourage them and applaud them for dancing the way they want to dance too. If any of this resonates with you, please connect with me on LinkedIn, and let's keep having this conversation until all women have the equality that's long overdue. Thanks very much.